Sarah Schmidt, Carranza, thank you so much for joining us on Highest Aspirations.
Thank you for inviting me to come on Highest Aspirations.
Yeah, I don't remember when I invited you. It was a long time ago. And then I was just telling you right before we started to click the record button that I ran into a good problem. And that was that I said, oh, we have way too many guests for this season. And so this has been a long time coming. I appreciate your patience.
Well, no problem. I'm just really excited for the opportunity to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. The topic that this is something I've been excited to talk about with you because we had a really robust conversation that I kind of wish I recorded when we first talked. And it was about professional learning, but it really spanned a whole bunch of different issues. And that's what I kind of liked about it. So we're going to try to keep this into or keep this a part of the topic of professional learning, but I have a feeling we're going to get into a bunch of different topics, which is a good thing. So let me start here. As someone who was a high school teacher for a long time, and who works in educational technology, and who's seen a lot of professional learning, it's a really thorny issue, in terms of what teachers need, what the research shows, and what's sort of actually happening in schools, which obviously varies from district to district, state to state, et cetera. So let's start here. In your view, what makes this a particularly challenging issue for teachers who work with multilingual learners?
Sure. I think the particularly challenging issue off the top of my head is all teachers are teachers who work with multilingual learners.
Hmm.
Um, it's highly unusual, especially in a large urban district like the one I work in, that there will be a teacher who doesn't have any multilingual learners in any of their classes. They may not have the newest newcomer, but there will be someone, at least one, in their class who's an English learner. And I think what happens is traditionally multilingual learning instruction has kind of operated in a silo as its own kind of discrete content area.
Hmm.
And what research has kind of borne out is that really EL is meant to be services to help students navigate the language demands of core content tier one instruction. So doing kind of multilingual learning as something different than the core um, doesn't necessarily prepare students to navigate the core. And that's really, I think, where we need to start is how do we help all educators see that they are educators of multilinguals, whether their
Hmm.
license says that or not.
Yeah, and that's something that we're going to get into is this idea that all teachers are teachers of language, which I think is the idealistic and I think aspirational point of view, not necessarily always the case. And you're already sort of getting into this idea of silos, and we know that education doesn't work in silos, particularly multilingual education and preparing students to sort of be able to be competent and successful in content area classes, and yet it sort of continues to be the case. And so a large part well, I'm going to ask you about this, but to my knowledge, a large part of sort of breaking down those silos comes in systems and structures, and particularly in with school leaderships. And we think about school leaders, principals, and maybe even at the district level, assistant superintendents of curriculum instruction, superintendents, et cetera. In your experience, do they have the knowledge, training, and experience they need? And I know I'm talking like in very general terms here, but like thinking about your own district or just the work that you've done in other places, do they have that knowledge or expertise? And if not, or for those of whom who don't, and there are those, what kind of support do they need?
Right. I think, unfortunately, there's no like systemic or systematic way to ensure that people have that when they go into leadership. That's never been kind of one of the standards of leadership that one must demonstrate proficiency on to get, an administrative license. Or if it is, it's kind of a general kind of baseline understanding, but not necessarily a deep understanding of what that looks like and means for a whole school or a whole district.
Like in the menu of courses that you have to take to do that, maybe there's a course that you can sort of select and optionally take to kind of get that. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Or if that, I mean,
Right.
there might be a special populations course, and EL is 1 week of the 16 semester weeks.
Gotcha. Yep.
So I think when we do have people that do have an expertise, it's because they kind of came out of EL maybe as a teacher before they went the route into administration. And because it's not a requirement, it's, those people kind of are special in that way. Um, and that's why I say that there's nothing systematic or systemic about it. It just kind of is a function of who is, available in your leadership teams, across your school districts.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I can bring up a bunch of examples, one in particular, and I won't mention the district, but there's a district that we at Elevation work with, and we have sort of profiled them and sort of gone to them over and over again about the fact that they are breaking down these silos between different departments and the EL department. And the example that we saw was with the math department. The math department and the EL department were working extraordinarily well together in a way that we really hadn't ever seen before. And so we were excited to find out what's happening here. And the school system is just really great. And they do have a great support system for their multilingual learners. And they're really trying to do that work at a systemic level. But do you want to try to guess what the secret sauce was?
My guess is their superintendent used to be an EL teacher, or their academic officer used to be an EL teacher.
Close. And that could be the case. I can't confirm or deny that. But what I can confirm is that the math department chair for the district was an EL teacher beforehand. So
Mhm.
he was bought in and he completely understood. And so he understood the importance of bringing language instruction into the math classes and really vice versa. And so your point there is a good one. And we have to, try to break down those silos, but it's hard to do, I think, in systems where maybe that's not the case.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think, schools really have a lot of urgency around all the work they do right now. We hear all the time, students aren't reading well, like there's a whole, push with science of reading coming about. What's going on with students critical thinking with math, and it's for all students, not just our students who are multilingual learners. But then, when there's so much urgency, eh, you almost have like urgency fatigue as a
Hmm.
system.
Yep.
There's only so many things that we can prioritize, or so many things that we can put first. And when everything is new and everything's overwhelming, um, it can be very difficult, for our teacher staff to navigate as well. Where do I put these priorities? How do I make these determinations? Because our general education staff, same thing. There's no requirement that you have any type of expertise in how to work with English learners.
Hmm.
So it really is dependent on the program you went through and what the people who built that program wanted to prioritize in their higher ed, teacher prep program.
Right. Right. Oh boy, there's so many different directions I could go in here. And I'm thinking like this idea of um it's kind of just random the way that this gets set up and sort of who you have in your school that's kind of had that kind of training and then can be a person maybe to provide, even if it's informal training or mentoring of others. And it really gets to, I think, what we mentioned earlier, and I hear it all the time, and it's this idea that all teachers are teachers of language, which I both love and I have a hard time with that expression because as I mentioned earlier, I think that's the aspiration, that's the idealistic point of view. Please feel free to like disagree with me. I don't think that's where we are at this point, and I'm not blaming anybody for not being there because, as you mentioned, this what you call it, urgency fatigue.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, right
It's a
now,
thing.
and yeah, right now in particular, there's 8,000 things on everybody's plate all at once, and they're all urgent. They all need to be getting done, and so to ask a teacher to go and do something else and something new is completely overwhelming for them. So if we want to get to that reality of all teachers are teachers of language, even in one school, like in your experience in
Mhm.
districts that you've worked at, how can we overcome the challenges associated? And I look at them in two ways. I think there's two kinds of challenges here. One is the skill set, right? The ability and the understanding um, that you need in order to work with multilingual learners effectively and then the mindsets,
Mhm.
which is a whole other issue of content teachers working with multilingual learners. I still think we have many content teachers who are experts in their field, but feel that that their job is to really put out the content. So
Mhm.
I'm asking you a very big question here. Feel free to dissect it in any way, but I'm thinking about the skill set and the mindset. How do we? Those are different approaches, right?
Yes, absolutely. You know, like when we think of like, there's a kind of like this, to me, like almost like like the three legs of like knowledge, skills, and dispositions.
Hmm.
You know, knowledge is, do I know what the kids need? Skill is, do I know how to give them what they need? And dispositions is, I believe that it's my job to do that well.
Love that. I love that analogy. That's great.
Um, well, thank you. And so I think really we have to approach this in a way where not only are we bringing forth the new knowledge with the teachers, we're supporting them in implementing the skills. I think a lot of times when we do professional development, it's here, go to this 2-hour PD, and then sort of miracle will occur and everything will be better.
Oh yeah, yep. We just talked about that an hour ago with someone
Yeah.
else.
Yep. And so that, you know, and we have, you know, years and years of data to show that that's not the way that we learn, and it's certainly not the way we teach children. You know, we with children, we kind of have this like gradual release of responsibility. I do, we do,
Hmm.
you do. So something that well, and we might get to this in later questions, but something that we've been working on with my department this year, that the one that I lead, is how do we really step into this you do? Because the you, I mean, the how do we step into the we do to facilitate the you do? Because when it's I do, then you do, well, you know, that's kind of a recipe for something not happening in a sustainable way. Because people don't necessarily know how to proceed if they get stuck or they feel overwhelmed. Whereas when they have like dedicated supports in place that are coming out to support you with this, not coming out and making you feel like I'm here to do something else to you. Um, really framing it as working with ELs isn't additional to your work. Working with ELs is the work,
Hmm.
because ELs are general ed students first. And I'm here to help you do that so you feel um safe, like you know, your own adult SEL is protected.
Sure.
Um, that you won't kind of have like, you feel safe to ask questions to me, that you feel that you have someone that you can come to when you're trying to like navigate maybe a situation where you're having a hard time determining what's an appropriate scaffold for a student. You know, there can be any number of ways where this feels supportive and not that, you know, I'm not like playing gotcha. It feels that I'm supported in the work that I'm trying to roll out.
Yeah, and without that we do piece, you're missing a huge opportunity. And I think you were kind of getting at this, or maybe even said it, to build confidence in a teacher who, a lack of confidence can show up in a lot of different ways. And certainly somebody who might not be confident in working with, in this case, multilingual learners, is likely not going to be very innovative and therefore probably not extremely effective in their job through no lack of trying, just that confidence barrier. And it sounds like what you're getting at that we do brings me to this sort of, a key element of professional learning and the research and everywhere is got to be job embedded. It's got to be related to what the teacher's doing. So it is, in what ways does sort of a job embedded approach help content teachers better understand and serve their really increasingly diverse students and make that learning more sticky? And I'll add to that question something, just an element of what you said, which is, how does it help them gain confidence? How does it help them to understand that this isn't a gotcha moment, observation, dreaded situation that we've always been through? I mean, how do you do that in a way that it's really helpful and not scary? Maybe it's scary no matter what at first. I don't know.
It can be, and I think this is where, as a leader, you have to build your team.
Yeah.
I tell my team, the team of mine that goes out and works with schools, my vision for those folks is that when they go out to schools and meet with their teams, I want those teams to be so happy to see them that you would have thought they won the lottery. Because they have such a supportive and collegial relationship with them. They are never the ones who are going to deliver any type of bad news to anybody. That comes from me. You know, as the leader, that's my job. So when they come out and say, hey, you know, can I support you? They've already, you know, established these relationships with the schools, the leadership teams, the principals, the EL teams that they work with. And then they're kind of bringing in more staff as we go. My team is kind of on call, you know, for professional development. We have principals, um, that we go out and they arrange for us to do PD at a staff meeting, kind of co-teaching 101. We've got some extension activities, and we also say, okay, now that you've finished kind of the level setting 101, sign up for some time for one of us to come out and work with you so that, we can help facilitate some of this common planning as you're navigating a new co-teaching relationship, or maybe just you're new to co-teaching, or maybe you're a brand new teacher. And you're navigating all of these things through newness, which is a lot to navigate.
Sure. Yeah, and let's go into some of the work you're doing. This will go one of my last questions, but I'm gonna bring it in now because I know that you're I don't know if you've piloted or you're still piloting. As I said last time we talked was a while ago, and you were piloting a program with TOSA's, Teachers on Special Assignment, teachers and administrators to overcome some of the challenges we're discussing. And it sounds like you were just kind of getting into that, but let's dive into that because you're doing some really interesting work. And what I would really like to get out of this is if you think about the people who are listening as you sort of answer this question, talk about what you're doing, think about what they can take out of it. What's replicable for them? What's a step that they can take? I always tell people this podcast, Highest Aspirations, is not professional development, but it's meant to inspire. So like as you think about that, think about, what next step maybe somebody could take if they're listening to what you're doing.
Sure. So yes, you're right. We're doing something totally new this year with the EL teachers in our district. So the last few years, funded through some ARP dollars, all elementary schools have access to this job embedded professional development, which is some of the sessions are more PLC teacher directed, and a lot of them were more district directed. And last year, our EL teachers attended those with their co-teaching teams. And in some schools, they said, yep, this has been great. This has really helped us, kind of mesh well together as a team. In some buildings, they've said, the content here really is focused on the classroom teacher, and I'm having a hard time navigating
Hmm.
what it means for me or how I enter into this. So this year, what we're doing is once a month, I have divided all of our elementary schools into 4 cohorts. And once a month, each cohort meets with my team, and they have like a full day of professional learning. And we're really focusing our EL supports in the writing domain. There are,
Why is that? The
oh,
data
well,
show that there's
yes. The writing domain, because, when you learn or acquire another language, the productive domains of speaking and writing come later than the
Mhm.
receptive domains of reading and listening. And that's just kind of how languages work.
Yeah, I'm still working on that in both English and Spanish.
Absolutely. And so knowing that, looking at we're a WIDA state.
Hmm.
So, our WIDA data shows kind of consistently that writing is the area where students will be, like discrepant from their other, 3 domains. So I said, well, if we're seeing here that this is the area where students are needing the most support, then let's support them there. Um, so our district is kind of in the midst of a lot of kind of curricular adoptions for elementary as well this year, because there was a new K-12 math adoption in our district. So every single person who does math is doing something new this year.
Yep.
New guidance around how we do literacy, so it's more aligned to science of reading. So
Urgency
we don't,
fatigue.
urgency fatigue. And then there's also been an adoption of a new writing curriculum that has kind of had a soft launch this year. So a lot of the schools aren't really doing the writing curriculum yet, or they might be implementing certain parts of it this year, with the expectation that next year will be full implementation.
Gotcha.
But what I did is I said, well, we still have kind of the ARP structures in place for me to do this. So I want to take advantage of that.
Good for you for doing
So
that, by the way. A lot of those funding, I can't even speak, is not being used. Sometimes not being used at all, and in many situations, not being used effectively. So just shout out to you for doing that. That's what we're
thank
finding.
you. Thank you. So what we did is I purchased kind of the curriculum guide for each of our EL teachers. There's like a K2 guide and a 3-5 guide. So everybody got one like teacher edition guide. Of whatever grade band was the one that was going to make the most sense for them. And everyone will also get the online access, which would include access to the other guide, and then just a tremendous amount of resources that come with this particular curriculum. I'm not sure if I can say the
You
name
can
of
say
it.
it.
Step Up to Writing is
Great.
the one that our district has gone with. So, between my department and our Office of Teaching and Learning, we've made sure that all of our teachers have access to that. And then I've sat down with the EL teachers and I've said, I want you to have this teacher guide as a resource, but I'm going to say right now, your job is not to implement this as is on the page here. That is your co-teacher's job because they're in charge of the literacy block. However, there are so many teacher moves that you need to be making as the EL professional here to help the students navigate the demands. So we have actually had our EL teachers digging into this for several months already, and the general ed teachers just got their first training like a week ago. So, and I've said to the EL teachers, you're leading the charge here.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think oftentimes they feel that they get access to things as an afterthought, or
Yep. Yep.
oh, good heavens, we forgot to give the EL teachers. And I said, when was the last time this happened where you got it ahead
Yeah.
of your colleagues? Like, it's unusual, right? And
They have a seat at the table right away, which is
mhm,
normally something that, in my experience, it has to be sort of clamored for and rarely is given. But you've designed a situation where they're at the head of the table, realistically.
exactly. And then I said, like, here are the resources that are going to help you enter in with the language demands. But I need you to have access to what the classroom teacher is doing, so that it's very clear that you know exactly what lessons are being taught, you know what the language demands are. Because again, depending on the level of common planning time they get, they might have common planning time every day together. They might have it a couple times a week. It really depends on the school and how they've scheduled their time. This way, everybody can be singing out of that same song sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then we've had time where the EL teachers work together with their school-based teams, and we say, okay, we're going to practice doing some lesson planning based on like kind of the lessons in the book. So here's what the book lesson looks like. How do we create our supplementary language development to accompany that during the co-teaching setting, and then also some additional integrated small group time for that. So that's really been my main focus this year is with our elementary EL teachers. Um, and that's a function of we have significantly more EL students at our elementary sites than our secondary sites.
Yep. Not uncommon.
And we okay, yep. And then we have um a number of students across our system who really are experienced multilinguals. I mean, they are in the secondary grades and still haven't exited EL services.
Mm-hmm.
And so looking at how can we provide these like really top-notch supports so that they really are operating at these like really high levels of academic language.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's great. I think you provided a really nice outline. And I think there's a lot of key takeaways there. If I were to provide my key takeaway for this, and you stressed it, but there's a lot more here, obviously, and mine's I guess very sort of general. But boy, if you can give EL teachers a seat at the table right away, and you create a system where that collaboration is not only expected but also appreciated, um and it's cycled through. It's not just a one-off. It's something that's happening. We know it's continuing. And then you have sort of whatever resource you're using to kind of anchor you to, which is key as well. And then, using that the ARP funding to do things like this, I think is and I know I mentioned it before, but like there's opportunities, and those opportunities pretty soon are going to run out. And so if you're listening to this thinking about where am I going to get funding, that's another conversation. We've done podcasts on that as well, but that's important.
Yep. Yeah. But I completely agree with you. I think kind of one of my main kind of missions this year and like my vision as a you know leader of a large district multilingual learning program is we need to make sure that everybody is working together from the outset.
Hmm.
It is so much easier to operate in that when that was just how it was always supposed to be, rather than to try to enter it as an afterthought when people already have their curriculum guides, their scope and sequence, how things are supposed to go. And then the EL teacher feels like they have to, justify or argue why they should be able to
Yeah.
service their students when that's really a civil right.
Yeah, or retrofit everything after, go back and, you've already designed everything and now you got to go back and fit, a square peg into a circle. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
But it requires planning and it requires leadership. And you've mentioned that more than once. One thing that you said earlier that I didn't sort of emphasize, I think is really important is this idea of having a team whose job it is to support, and then having a leader whose part of their job is to make hard decisions and sometimes to relay news that might not be great to people. That team, you need to be putting sort of, I don't, it's maybe not the right way to describe, but you need to be putting money in the bank with that team,
Mhm.
right? You need to really, if you, especially when it comes time to make a deposit or take some money out, which you definitely need to do at some point. Um, Okay, so I want to sort of transition into the fact that you've laid out all of these great ideas and then you kind of made it practical with what you're doing at your district.
Mhm.
I'm interested, number one, to learn how difficult it has been for you to attract the teachers, the highly qualified teachers that you need in your district. That's, I guess, the simple part of it. And then the other part of it is, and I know that this has not been easy for many districts. How do you, it's like just a logistical question of like, where I am, it's impossible to get subs. I mean, it's so hard to find them now. And how do you go about creating these professional learning experiences when number one, you maybe not have the staff that you need or that you'd like to have, and two, you don't have the coverage to take them out of class. How have you overcome those challenges? Maybe the first hasn't been a challenge for you, and if it hasn't, I'd love to hear, what your solution is to that problem.
Sure. Um, yeah, absolutely. So attracting and retaining teachers, yes, it's definitely different now than it was even a few years ago. But I will say, I really have been very blessed that a large number of our teachers are kind of career teachers in our district. Um, and as our contract for with our Federation of Educators, um, it's kind of tied to enrollment. So we have this 52-to-1 ratio, and then we figure out what the number is. So if your ratio is if you've got 104 students, you divide that by 52, and that's your number of teachers, right? Um, Now that has been more difficult kind of since we've been coming back from the pandemic as we've had to hire additional teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm hearing from some of the folks in some of our local universities is they just have many fewer people coming through their programming than even 5, 6 years ago. So looking for new teachers can be challenging. Something that I am really working hard on is I employ about 90 bilingual educational assistants in our system that they represent the languages of our students.
Sarah, real
Some of
quick, I just went back and forth. It's like, how many total students in your district? How many total multilingual learners or English learners in your district?
about 9,000.
Okay, just to give people a sense. Sorry, because you mentioned
Yeah,
90,
and
and
that's
I just want
about
to
a
give
third of
people.
our total.
Got
Yeah.
it. Perfect. Thank you very much. I should have asked you that at the beginning.
Yeah. So we got about 9,000. That's about a third of our total population.
Great.
So our bilingual educational assistants represent, a number of different languages, and a lot of these folks are coming from, a lot of these folks are first generation immigrants themselves, and a lot of them have educational experiences in their countries that then they came to the US and they've gotten hired as educational assistants, but they found kind of the procedure to get a teaching license and the bureaucracy surrounding that to be kind of a very opaque process. So
That's
a
not
lot of
surprising to
them,
me.
have
So do I.
right, right. So something that is really important to me is we have also bilingual educational assistant professional development where they come once a quarter. And at the end of every session, I have a local university come in and kind of give a presentation about, what programs they have, how to apply, And then I'm going to have someone from our licensing board come in later this year and meet with people who were credentialed teachers in their home countries to see what transfers and what coursework or other work may they still need to do to have that license become active in our state. Because I think there's a lot of people who are natural born educators right now that they're just not active, like they're not as operationalized as they could be
Mhm.
because of not having a clear understanding of an opaque bureaucracy.
Two things you just mentioned, I think, are huge. And honestly, I mean, it depends on where you are and your proximity to these kinds of institutions, but partnership with a local university is huge. That's a win-win. I mean, there is very rarely a case when a local university isn't going to come in to provide some information on the services that they're offering because it's a win for them and it's a win for the school. And then one thing that I really haven't heard, and I'm surprised they haven't, is you mentioned somebody coming in to talk about the licensing, like the requirements from, is that from the Department of Education or how does that work?
Yeah. So a few years back, our department in education kind of divided into two. So the Department of Education is more like your state standards and how to implement them,
Sure.
that sort of thing. And then the other half is the professional educator standards and licensing board.
Great. Credentialing stuff.
Professional license, yeah. Well, the acronym is PELSB. Everybody calls it PELSB.
Okay.
And so PELSB is kind of the entity that works with not only accrediting the colleges so that they're able to offer K-12 licenses,
Yep.
but then also works with people, getting their licenses, and that includes people coming from out of state. My state is one of the few states that actually has a standalone ESL teacher license. So when people are coming from other states, their ESL license often doesn't transfer because it may be an endorsement on an existing license, but not as much standalone linguistics work as is
Right.
required in our state. And then looking at people coming in from out of country and looking at, what program did they have once they have their transcript evaluated by, an evaluation service where they're able to say this is equivalent to this degree with this type of focus. Then our standards and licensing board will say, okay, based on this, you actually have a license now. Or based on this, you would need to take classes that meet these 10 standards, and then that institution could then recommend you for a license. So I've, seen this work a few different ways where people have, they're a lot closer to a teaching license than they ever thought. Once they actually were able to get someone to sit down with them and kind of help them navigate the process. And I don't navigate that process because it's also too opaque for me.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
But I have um I got somebody's name at the standards and licensing board, and she has now become my go-to person. And so now I will send emails all the time like, "Hi, Emily. I've got another person for you. Um, you know, I'm copying them on the email, and they're gonna send you their documents from the transcript evaluation service. We can't wait to hear back."
Yeah.
And then based on that, there's been a couple times where she said, "Oh, well, this person would actually qualify for an ESL teaching license right now." And I'll say, "Great. When do you want to start as a teacher?" And because it's important to me that we have um folks in front of our kids that represent our kids' languages and cultures too.
For sure. I mean, well, first of all, everybody needs to find an Emily, and shout out to Emily. She's doing really important work. Um,
She's awesome.
yeah, it sounds like. I mean, if you could have a contact at a place like that that is, pleasant and helpful, that's great. And those people are there. You just need to find them, which really leads me to
Mhm.
this idea of like you're emphasizing partnerships. We talked about silos earlier. Those silos don't just exist in the school; they exist in the entire community. There are resources at our disposal, and I really, I think it's admirable that you're not only breaking down silos in your school, but you're thinking about ways. Bureaucracy is always going to be there, especially with teaching and the kinds of, any kind of public service job. It's going to be there. I have my opinions of whether or not it should be there and what we should cut, but my opinions don't really matter because they're going to exist. What can you put in place to help sort of cut through that bureaucracy? In this case, it's Emily. In many other cases, it's other people and other organizations. Um, and think about, I mean, you just said like all these people who were surprised or had no idea that they could get a teaching license. You're putting them to work in a job that they probably feel really passionate about. You're bringing people into a system that reflect the population of students that you have and you're setting everybody up for success. It's a huge, huge win. And it doesn't happen in a silo. It doesn't happen in a silo in a school, and it doesn't happen in a silo in a community. Um, to me, those are like, I think about these, I'm always thinking about what, if you're listening to this, what steps can you take? I mean, that's, you have to, I guess, be close enough to a university that you can make that connection, but you can always reach out to your, whatever your sort of credentialing department is, and find out. Um, that's amazing. Great work.
And I work in our capital city, and the professional standards licensing board's also in the capital city. So I have the benefit too. If I was to reach out and not get an answer, before I met Emily, for example, I could just drive over there and say, "Oh, yoo-hoo, can someone help me?" Well, that's okay. I'll sit here and read my book while I wait. It's fine.
Yeah, I can't. I used to do that, and I started teaching a long time ago. I think before, there was a lot of easier communication, but it wasn't. I was in Massachusetts, and let's just say it just wasn't easy to get answers. And the Department of Education in Massachusetts, about 40 minutes from where I lived, and I used to go there more often than I would like in order to make sure I got answers. But when I went, I got the answers. Hopefully that's not the case anymore. But you got to be persistent, and then what you find out, or at least what I found out, is that once you sort of establish relationships with these folks, people look at it too much like it's a bureaucracy, or it's like going to get your driver's license. It's not. These people are in education. They're there for a reason. They're there to do good work. And I think you just got to find the people who are going to advocate for you. And there's more of them than we think. So that's great.
Well, and I say to people, I'm like, yes, you have to have a license to teach, but like, it's not like a fishing license where I can go to the gas station and buy one. I mean, it's like difficult to get a teaching
Yeah,
license. So, um, so I think like sometimes when I hear people, we'll just hire someone with that license. Okay, do you know anyone with that license? I would love to know if there's someone who
particularly
has
if
that
you're
license.
if you're trying to find the exact types of people that we're talking about, people who reflect the communities of the students we serve. Those people have, in many cases, more experience than many others do, but they don't understand how to navigate the system. And as I've said, I think 3 times now, neither do I. So that's not surprising. We just need to give people the tools they need to be able to access it.
Yeah. I think and I think that's exactly it. This is not about Sarah. This is about the system. And, we see that this system is gatekeeping certain people. And so, okay, well, what's the key to the gate?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if I can help like, navigate that, then that's what I'll do. And that'll be my contribution. Like it doesn't have to be that I do everything. I need to find the right people to do the right parts of the jobs. I think that's like kind of what the leadership piece of it.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. And I think that's another sort of thread of this conversation is the importance of leadership and the things that a leader needs to do in order to, I feel like the theme here, one of the themes is breaking down the silos, and you need leadership to do that. People that are working and are suffering from urgency fatigue and everything else that teachers are dealing with right now, um, are really not able to break those silos. They're stuck in them. And so you need advocates and leaders to do that. Um,
Mhm. And I think, and I'll say with credit to my colleagues and my direct boss, I am in a position where if I go to my boss and say, "Hey, I'm feeling like I'm not getting any traction with this person or this department or this entity," my boss is like, "Well, we're gonna change that right now. That will not be happening."
yeah.
Um, when I first started in my role, that I um kind of connected with our kind of director of teaching and learning, and I kind of went to him and I said, we got to talk. I need to make sure that like ML perspectives are all over the place when we're doing curricular adoptions, when we're doing these conversations, and this has got to happen." And he said, "You know what? You're absolutely right. Um, what do we need? Like, who do I need to put on the meeting invites? Who do I add where?" And I said, "Well, because I kind of like stormed into his office thinking it was going to be like a long meeting." And then he agreed with me right away. So I was like, "I'll send you the names. Have a good day." Kind of anticlimactic, actually. I
Yeah.
really
You're all
like
hyped up to get
gassed myself up for it too.
to be in a battle, and there's no battle needed, and then you have to walk away and do
Yeah.
something with all that pent up energy. Um, well, Sarah, I have to say, as we kind of wind down here, so my colleague Dennis Ocampo is the one who introduced me to you and the work you're doing. I'm glad he did. So I've already shouted out Emily. I'm going to shout out Dennis as well. He's a great colleague, and I appreciate him bringing us together. So I learned about your work through him, but if I'm listening to this podcast episode right now and I want to learn more about you or from you or the work you're doing, is there a place that folks can go or reach out?
Yeah, my email address, is sarah.schmidt@spps.org. I work for the St. Paul Public Schools in St. Paul, Minnesota. And the St. Paul Public Schools website kind of highlights a lot of the great work that's going on across our system with um, Tier 1, with immersion dual language education, with multilingual learners. There's a lot to celebrate here.
Great. And we'll link to both of those, both the email address and the website to the district. And really appreciate you sharing that information. It takes a community here, and it's nice when folks kind of reach out to our guests and establish different relationships there. And then you end up seeing each other at conferences and different things like that, which is amazing. This community is really vibrant and special. The last question I have for you, speaking of community, is we try to sort of create a nice library of books that folks are reading. So I'm going to ask you what I ask everybody who's come on the podcast, and that is there a book or a film or really any other resource that's had an important influence on you, either personally or professionally, that you'd recommend to anybody who's listening?
Sure. I would say, like, personally, one of my favorite books is The Four Agreements.
Oh yeah,
Um, I love that one. And there is another one. It's got, a bad word in the title, but basically it's oh gosh, how does the title go? The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F.
yeah,
Um, and that one I really liked just because it kind of takes a look about like how you can like turn failure on its head and like into a learning experience rather than something to be avoided at all costs, which was an interesting take on that. So those are a couple that's a couple personal ones. And then I love mysteries. Like to read something for fun, mysteries are my jam.
yeah,
So there's a new series I started by Mia Manansala. It's a cozy mystery. So if you're familiar with cozy mysteries, basically they're like very wholesome and innocent, except for, someone does die, so that part's not great. But think of like Murder She Wrote.
yep,
Murder
yep,
She Wrote would be a
yep.
great example of a cozy. This one is about a Filipino family in Illinois, and the first one of the series is called Arsenic and Adobo by Mia Manansala. And then there is a great book that I've been doing a book study on with my team this year called Long-Term Success for Experienced Multilinguals.
Hmm.
We didn't really even dig into uh, experienced multilinguals and some of the stuff we're doing in St. Paul for that and the stuff that we're like building towards. But this book by Tan Nguyen and Beth Skelton is a fantastic one that was not too, I mean, this is not an old book. It's fairly recently
No,
published.
it's fairly new, and I was just looking behind me because I was looking for my copy of it. Ton and Beth have both been on the podcast to talk about that book and other things. They were also part of our Impact conference. They're friends and valued members of the community, and that book is great. And what they've done is they've sort of reframed. We talk about asset based approach all the time. Experience multilinguals instead of long term English learners, and just that change of a title goes a long way. We talked a lot about that in our episode. They're wonderful.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, and Tan actually was the keynote at our Minnesota EL teacher conference earlier this school year,
Oh,
and
great.
so being able to meet him in the flesh, and what an engaging presenter. He even presented after lunch, which not a great time to be a presenter, and he just his energy on the stage. I mean, the whole room was just captivated.
Yeah, for sure. He's pretty special. He's been. I don't think I've ever. In fact, he may be listening to this. He has his own podcast. So we both listen to each other's, and he we've never met in person. We've been probably collaborating now for at least since the podcast started since 2018, and I don't think I've ever met him in person. But he's wonderful. We've collaborated with him a lot, and I cannot recommend that book enough. And Beth also does really great work, and they do great work together. And thanks, by the way, for recommending just kind of wind down books. If mystery's not your thing, that's fine. Find something else. You can just there's a lot going on, and I think finding something that we can do to kind of prioritize our mental health and just relax a little bit is important. I have read the Four Agreements. That's a great one as well. So I think we got like four for the price of one with those recommendations. So really appreciate that.
Want to make sure you get your money's worth.
100%. Well, Sarah, again, thanks to Dennis for introducing us, and thank you so much for providing just lots of great information about, breaking down silos, what it means to be a leader, what job embedded professional development really looks like. I think we got into a lot. We just scraped the surface of it. So hopefully folks will kind of take the next step to dive into a piece of this that is most interesting to them. But thanks so much for your time. Thanks for being patient, and look forward to continued collaboration.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me on. It's been a lot of fun.